Before I start, I have a couple of things I want to say. First of all, on January 27th, we have our annual service auction. And there's a dinner involved, and it's really great. And this actually, I understand, was wrapped by that 15th century Sikh Kabir, and it is one of the many items which will be yours and will bring joy and that hidden guest right into your life. So don't miss out on the service auction. You'll be very, very happy. And the second thing, I wanted to remind everyone before we get started that what our children and youth coordinator, Bob Meese, shared with the children about the 7 days of the Shinto New Year's celebration. This is the day of the human. And if people offend you and everything, you're not supposed to take it. So if you don't like my sermon, not a problem. Refrain from getting bent out of shape, please. You'd be upsetting all of Japan. But all that notwithstanding, this time of year can be, often is, depressing for some people. We all appreciate this last week's rain and the forecast for tomorrow through Wednesday, but the dark skies, short days, and cool temperatures can be gloomy. Plus, the 2016 presidential election and the resulting changes and reordered priorities in Washington have left religious liberals everywhere seriously perturbed. Some people I recently have spoken with are reporting a report teetering on the edge of despair. It's partly the winter blues, and it's partly, I think, a collective response of the body politic to the new hard-edged, bipolar political atmosphere experienced by many as a body blow to their democratic faith. 8 or 9 years ago, a church member I was close to requested that I write and deliver a sermon on the right to die. I did, in the end. Initially, however, I was kind of reluctant, until I remembered reading an article years earlier by the writer and Whole Earth catalog editor Stuart Brand. Always pushing the envelope, Brand was contemplating publishing an essay on how to commit suicide. But he, just like me, had misgivings, and he decided to ask his minister, Richard Baker, then Roshi of the San Francisco Zen Center, what he thought of the idea. "Don't publish an article on how to commit suicide," said Baker Roshi. "Publish an article on how not to commit suicide." Hence this morning's sermon. But let's be honest, suicide merits our attention. As an ever-present option, it's also scary. Whenever someone we've known succumbs to suicide, we are reminded of our vulnerability to its apparent allure. My dad committed suicide 2 weeks after I graduated from high school, the summer I turned 18, about 10 days after my 18th birthday. Others I have known and cared for have also committed suicide, including more than a few congregants over the years. In my last settled ministry in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the chair of the membership committee, a deeply loved and respected church member, took her life at home alone, despite the efforts of many of us who knew she was depressed and did all we could to keep her alive. And I am still grieving years later. Stuart Brand's original plan had been sparked by the Hemlock Society's efforts to promote death with dignity for the terminally ill. Now known as Compassion and Choices, Unitarian Universalists started many of its chapters across the country, including here in the Bay Area. Compassion and Choices members argue that suicide is acceptable under certain circumstances, such as incurable disease and old age. The idea is that although life is in general good, people who face irreversible suffering should not be forced to continue suffering. Most Unitarian Universalists would agree with this idea, or at least support the rights of those who do. By and large, liberal religion asserts that a person's life belongs to her or him, and no other person has a right to force on others their own conviction that life must be lived. Only the individual involved can make that decision, and whatever decision he or she makes should be respected. Psychiatrist, the late psychiatrist Thomas Szasz, once named Humanist of the Year by the American Humanist Association, goes further, arguing that suicide is the most basic right of all. If freedom equals ownership over one's own body and life, then the right to end that life is the most basic right of all. If others can force you to live, you do not own yourself, but belong to them. Indeed, philosophical thinking in the 19th and 20th centuries led, in some cases, to the point that suicide was no longer a last resort or even something that one must justify, but something that one must justify not doing. Many forms of existentialist thinking essentially begin with the premise that life is objectively meaningless and proceed to the question of why one should not go ahead and just jump off the bridge. Most answer by suggesting that the individual has the power to give personal meaning to their life. The existentialists Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, for instance, both rejected suicide, considering it an escape from freedom. Fleeing from the absurdity of reality into illusions, religion, or into death was not, for either Camus or Sartre, the way out. We should embrace life passionately, both men believed, despite its meaninglessness, and despite its alarming, sometimes horrible violence. Philosophy notwithstanding, nearly everyone who contemplates suicide does so because they are depressed. In The Butcher's Wife, Taiwanese feminist writer Li Ang declares, people commit suicide for only one reason, to escape torment. While I was living and serving as a Unitarian Universalist minister on Martha's Vineyard Island, the late award-winning author William Styron, living right across the street from the little Unitarian church there, fell victim to a crippling and almost suicidal depression, the same illness that took the lives of Sylvia Plath, Primo Levi, and Virginia Woolf. Styron wrote about his descent in a memoir, Darkness Visible. He manages to convey within its pages the torturous progression of his spirit and his eventual recovery with a heartrending candor and precision that will arouse a shock of recognition even in people who have been spared the suffering he describes. Television actress, Los Angeles resident Mariette Hartley has also written powerfully about suicide and how to prevent it. When I was living in Venice Beach, I attended a lecture by Miss Hartley at the Venice Public Library on how she overcame a family history of alcoholism and suicide. There were a lot of others attending with similar family histories. Mariette Hartley's down-to-earth presentation and the heartfelt discussion that ensued were powerful, healing experiences for me and for many others in attendance, I'm sure. If you're one of those rare souls who's never known anyone who killed themselves, you might think it's a rare, freaky occurrence. It's not rare. It's just rarely talked about. As YouTube celebrity Logan Paul discovered last week when in Japan's Aokigahara forest near Mount Fuji, he uploaded images of what appeared to be the body of a distraught man who had just hanged himself. Paul apparently thought he was pushing the envelope. He was surprised when his emotional cluelessness was condemned universally. In the United States today, someone takes his or her own life every 18 minutes. Suicide is much more common than homicide. Suicide is the highest cause of death among those 15 to 24 and among people over 65. Many of them were probably preventable. Suicide survivors often regret their decision immediately. Ken Baldwin and Kevin Hines are among the handful of people who have jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and survived. Baldwin was 28 and severely depressed on the August day in 1985 when he told his wife not to expect him home until late. As he left, Baldwin recalls, "I instantly realized that everything in my life that I thought was unfixable was totally fixable, except for having just jumped." Kevin Hines was 18 when he jumped off the bridge in September 2000. "It was like, screw this, nobody cares," he recalled, "so I jumped. But then my first thought was, what the hell did I just do? I don't want to die." There's a mixed up, confused quality to most suicidal thinking, a sense of power that comes from having the last word. But do we? Buddhists and Hindus, believing in reincarnation, also believe that we carry our karma with us beyond the grave. While they do not consign suicides to hell or anything like it, they point out that according to their understanding, taking one's own life does not resolve any of a person's problems. That whatever's gnawing at one's soul will continue through many lifetimes, if necessary, until it's properly addressed and resolved. Meanwhile, here in this life, you have a support system, if you avail yourself of it, that can help you. Reach out to them. I often mention this to UUs who confide in me about their suicidal ideation. Despairing over the loss of a job or loved one or declining powers, overwrought souls just want to die and escape it all. Knowing they cannot blot out a certain page of their lives, they decide to throw the whole book into the fire. Okay, fine. But if the Buddhists and Hindus are correct, all their issues will abide within their soul, whatever they do to their bodies. And they'll still have to deal with it after all. Now, I'm not sure about life after death and reincarnation. I'm pretty agnostic about this subject. But I do know how I feel about church members who are contemplating suicide and don't talk to me about what's churning away inside their hearts. Please, if you're struggling with such matters, give me a call. Let's talk it over. And who knows, maybe the Buddhists and Hindus are right. Maybe there is reincarnation. Impossible to know for sure, but if that's so, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. If there is reincarnation and you go ahead and kill yourself without letting me know what's going on first and talking with me about it, then get ready. Because come your next life, I'm going to find out who you are and where you're living, and I'm going to come kill you. So be forewarned. The other thing I always try to gently remind those contemplating taking their own life, and here I speak from personal experience, is what a terrible burn suicide is for those left behind. A wound that does not have to be. Consider, Some suicides are carefully planned, but most are not. Few people wake up thinking that they will take their life, but circumstances suddenly make it possible. A couple of beers, an implosive thought, and a gun can be an extremely volatile mixture. Berkeley suicidologist Dr. Richard Seiden published a study, Where Are They Now?, in which he followed up on 515 people who were prevented from jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge between 1937 and 1971. After, on average, more than 26 years, 94% of the would-be suicides were either still alive or had died of natural causes. The findings confirm previous observations that suicidal behavior is crisis-oriented and acute in nature, Seiden concluded. If you can get a suicidal person, through her or his crisis, Seiden put the high-risk period at 90 days, chances are extremely good that they will not kill themselves later. 90 critical days, 3 months, 1 season of the year. How to keep on keeping on for 1 quarter. Well, 1, reach out to people who care about you, starting with your family and your minister. 2, talk to your doctor. Medication can achieve a lot. Even mild sleeping pills are helpful, very helpful, when it comes to making it through emotionally rough patches. 3rd, be careful about self-medication, alcohol, and controlled substances. It only tends to add fuel to the fire. 4, lock up any guns or other lethal methods. And 5, don't be afraid to talk about your situation. You are not alone. It's impossible to know whether any one suicide might have been prevented, but many suicidal people do, in fact, want to be saved. As the eminent suicidologist E.S. Sneedman has said, the paradigm is of a man who cuts his throat and cries for help in the same breath. After thinking about this for the last 50 years, I've decided that what would-be suicides need is hope. The feeling we have right now is not permanent, that things will change, that our pain, excruciating as it may be, will heal, and that better days will come. As the English author and poet Vida Sackville West once put it, the hope for paradise, to hope for paradise, is to live in paradise. A very different thing from actually getting there. To hope for it is to live there, which is very different than actually getting there. Just hoping puts you in a new place. Just imagining a better day is the first step, the critical step in discovering it. But how to imagine and thereby mobilize one's hope. When dealing with superhuman powers, and depression, for those who have suffered it, is such a power, we are often helped by personifying those powers. That's the benefit, or one important one anyway, of mythology. Consider the Greek myth of Pandora's box. After Prometheus' theft of fire, or the secret, that is, of how to control it, Zeus ordered Hephaestus to create the woman Pandora. She was given many seductive gifts from Aphrodite, Hermes, Hera, and the other gods and goddesses. Fearing reprisals for his theft of fire, Prometheus warned his brother Epimetheus not to accept any gifts from Zeus. But Epimetheus became smitten and would not listen, and he married Pandora. Pandora had been given a large jar and instructions by Zeus to keep it closed, but having also been given the gift of curiosity, she ultimately opened it. When she opened it, all of the evils, ills, diseases, and burdensome labor that humankind had not previously known escaped from the jar. Talk about a cause for depression. But it is said that at the very bottom of her box, there lay one additional spirit, hope. As the poet says, hope springs eternal. One particular poet, Emily Dickinson, put it this way: hope is a thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Hope, it seems to me, is not so much a feeling as something you do, a modus operandi. The old Universalists used to refer to their religion as the larger hope. They believed that ultimately all would be saved and everything in life, everything across the whole universe would be redeemed. That the entire cosmos would, in the final disposition of things, be reabsorbed into the eternally loving creative principle from whence it had all arisen. The old Universalists did not stop there, by the way, just believing that their salvation was wrapped up in everyone else's. No, those Universalists then organized their lives accordingly, on the assumption that the whole of reality was connected and was destined for wonder and joy and happiness. I still believe that, unequivocally. Others of you may be less sure. I, myself, am sometimes less sure. We all are. Which is why, then, as now, gathering regularly with others who share a creative and optimistic view of life is very crucial to stay healthy and strong. But one doesn't have to be an old-style theological universalist. Like Camus and Sartre, you may think the world is meaningless. Fine. But if that's how it feels to you, please go a step further and, like Camus and Sartre, embrace life in spite of its meaninglessness. You'll find the absurdity funnier and the human touches sweeter, more poignant, and more beautiful as well. Be part of the larger hope. Like the poet Camus proposed, clearly a small U universalist. Make love with all you find beautiful and important and special in the life before you. Music, art, nature, your grandchildren, working for justice, a good book, Marx Brothers movies, gardening, talking to old friends. Whatever you love, hope is there. And it will sustain you if you let it, even through the darkest night. So let it in. And let it be. Shalom. Amen. Namaste.